Hi there, Jonathan here. The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website where you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. That's at www.jonathanfoust.com. Thank you and enjoy. So this talk is about how you can find the balance between making your life happen and letting your life happen. We all have desires and we all want to get things done in our lives. And sometimes you can get things done without willpower. A little example. An old man lived alone in Minnesota. He wanted to spade his potato garden, but it was very hard work. His only son, who would have helped him, was in prison. The old man wrote a letter to his son and mentioned his situation. Dear son, I'm feeling pretty bad because it looks like I won't be able to plant my potato garden this year. I hate to miss doing the garden because your mother always loved planting time. I'm just getting too old to be digging up a garden plot. If you were here, I know my troubles would be over, and I know you would dig the plot for me if you weren't in prison. Love, Dad. Shortly, the old man received this telegram. For heaven's sake, Dad, don't dig up the garden. That's where I buried the guns. At 4 a.m. the next morning, a dozen FBI agents and local police officers showed up and dug up the entire garden without finding any guns. You're getting ahead of me here. Confused, the old man wrote another note to his son, telling him what happened, asking him what to do. His son's reply was, "Go ahead and plant your potatoes, Dad. It's the best I could do for you from here." So it's one way to get things done. So there are so many different strategies in life, either on the material plane or spiritually. There are the schools that kind of specialize in all the skillful ways you can make things happen. And then there are all the schools and philosophies about how to just let your life happen. And I'd like to explore a little bit of these with you. Like in that meditation, part of your time was focused on making it happen, paying attention on purpose, coming back to the breath. And you may have felt some benefit from that, kind of a calming, more of an arriving, more of a sense of presence. And kind of arising out of that is this sense of tapping into kind of non-judging awareness, or mindfulness, if you will. Just the awareness of what is changing, the awareness of flow. That stage is kind of a willful, but also kind of a level of open monitoring, where you're just being aware of what's changing and how you're relating to it. But there's another quality, that third quality, which is just letting it happen. That flow of like the sounds and the breath and all of it's happening by itself. You can't turn it off. So what if you just simply let it be? Like, what would happen if you tapped more into that quality of letting be? So I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of the unskillful approach to making it happen, as well as the skillful approach to making it happen, and a little bit on the unskillful and the skillful approach to letting it happen, and then a little bit about balance. How do you find your way in between these two polarities? About 15 years ago, I was contacted by the Radisson Cruise Line. They were putting out, it was a new thing for them, where these cruises that had, they have speakers for when you're at sea and you're not at port. So they were doing a whole thing on wellness. So they invited me to be one of the lecturers on this cruise, and of course I said yes. I had never done a cruise before, and it was a really interesting experience. But I noticed within a couple days there was one guy who looked utterly miserable. There's just this dark cloud around him. He just caught my eye because he seemed so unhappy. Such a juxtaposition to the luxury of this incredible cruise, and his wife was sort of attentive to him, but also a little concerned for him. And somehow she dragged him to one of actually came to a few of my lectures on stress management and stuff like that. And I was kind of giving a talk and leading experiences about the power of slowing down and paying attention. And at the end, he raised his hand. I'm not making this up. He raised his hand, this group full of people. He said, yeah, but what if you do these practices and you find out you hate your life? It kind of shocked me. I mumbled something in response, but I talked with him afterward, and I got a little bit of his story. And he loved science, and he got his PhD in chemical engineering, and then he took a job with Coca-Cola. He was like an executive at Coca-Cola, and something about his life wasn't working. And the sense was that he had been there long enough where it didn't make sense to retire. So it was the classic golden handcuffs experience, where he was miserable in his job, but it didn't make sense for him to leave. And of course, I never saw him after that cruise, but I've thought about him a lot, because it so represents, and I think all of us at different times have really committed to something and really given ourselves to it fully, to find out it really didn't work. It really didn't resonate. And I've talked with a number of people. Just someone not too long ago who said, commercial real estate, that's what I'm going to do. They read about it, got excited about it, spent a lot of money, getting trained in how to do commercial real estate, got their license, and they found out, I hate this, Have you ever committed to something fully to find out it just didn't work? Some people are drawn to meditation for different reasons. But a lot of people are drawn to meditation because they've reached some point in their life where they've thought, if I'm making this much money, then I'll be happy. Then they're making that much money and they realize they're not happy. There's something that calls us to the practice, that we just see kind of the inherent dissatisfaction of our lives. After all the effort we put into our lives, we see the inherent emptiness of it. And so we begin to slow down and pay attention. And sometimes when you begin to slow down and pay attention, you begin to recognize more clearly all the elements of your life that are between you and really being happy. The main regret of the dying is I wasn't true to myself. Somehow they missed being true to their real life purpose. And I get to hang out with a lot of people who practice meditation. And so many people talk about how when they start to pay attention, when they begin to cultivate non-judging awareness in their lives begin to change. There are certain, people often say, the people I've always hung out with, I don't like hanging out with them anymore. Or this job that I really liked, I'm just seeing it's not that satisfying. Or, these anxieties I've been holding on to, they just don't have the same grip that they had before. Something really begins to change when you begin to really slow down and really begin to explore what it's like to observe through this lens of non-judging awareness. And that change, I think, is a good sign. But we're so trained in our culture to use focus and willpower to get what we want. It's not a bad thing, but it's something we really celebrate in this culture. So I thought I would look up some aphorisms on willpower, those inspirational posters that, there are. So here are a couple I ran across. If you can't run, you crawl. If you can't crawl, find someone to carry you. It will hurt. It will take time. It will require dedication. It requires sacrifice. There will be temptation. But I promise you, when you reach your goal, it will be worth it. It goes on. If plan A doesn't work, remember the alphabet has 25 more letters. I'm not knocking willpower. It has its place. But geez. But willpower without awareness can be dangerous. You can end up like the guy on that cruise who really focused on what he thought he wanted and then finding himself deeply unhappy and hating his life. So the question becomes, how do you align your willpower in a way that feels aligned in your life? So this weekend I was teaching at Kripalu Center up in Western Massachusetts, and in the morning I went for a walk, and there are these the foundation of was this mansion, this beautiful big mansion there, and it's a pretty amazing place up there. It has a really, really long history of different institutions who have lived there. The Kripalu Center, which is there, it's one of the largest, yoga and health centers in the country. And before that, the building was owned by the Jesuits. It was the main Jesuit training center in New England. And before that, it was the home of Andrew Carnegie, who, at the end of his life, wanted to retire to Scotland, but the U-boats were patrolling, and he chose to live there because it reminded him so much of Scotland. And before then, it was built by a family. Anson Phelps Stokes was the builder. This was back in the late 1800s, before there was federal income tax, and there were the robber barons in the Berkshire Mountains in western Massachusetts. Super wealthy people would build these incredible mansions, and the mansion that they built was the largest private residence in North America. And the one thing about Western Massachusetts, I noticed when I looked through the phone book, there are all these Italian names. And they actually brought over stonemasons from Italy to build these buildings. And the story goes that as they were building this mansion, Mrs. Phelps decided she didn't like the color of the stone. So using horse and carts, they hauled away all the rock and then brought back a rock with the color she liked. And it really struck me about just 120 years later, this massive monument that they had willed into being was just rubble that was all falling apart. And it's a very helpful thing to remember that scale of what we're creating and putting in the context of time. But as I was back wandering the ashram at Kripalu, where I lived for so long, I was remembering about when our community went through a big change, and we all had to. The community sort of melted down, and we all had to make our way out into the world. And one of my friends decided he was going to go to acupuncture school. And he said, Frank, this acupuncturist in the town over there, he said, he only works 4 days a week, and he's making 6 figures. that means I can do that and have free time. So that's why I'm going to acupuncture school. And it kind of made sense. He'd do something. He was a really health-oriented guy. He was actually kind of a hypochondriac. But one of my friends said, "Do you really want to be working with sick people all the time?" And he said, "Ew, I'd have to work with sick people?" That was the end of acupuncture school for him. Another friend of mine decided he wanted to fly jets. And I remember talking with him, I thought, wow, do you really want to go through all that training? Because there are people who've been in the military who are fully trained, and you'd have to go back to school and all that expense. And he said, I've always wanted to do this. My wife and I are going to raise a family, and this way I'll have blocks of time when I can be with my family. And he went ahead and pursued that. And it's a very interesting thing when you look at aligning your will, of making your life happen. It's very helpful to make sure that the action is really where you want to be going. And there are a couple inquiries I find that are really helpful. One is, just as the Phelps family, willed that building only to find it disappeared. We have to recognize that over the scope of time, anything you create will go back into emptiness as well. And the other question is to really ask yourself, when you want to bring something into being, to ask yourself why. Because the why will sort of connect you with your passion. So a little reflection, if you will. If you like, you can close your eyes. You might take a few moments just to deepen your breath, and you might bring your mind to just something you'd like to bring forward, some action you'd like to perform in your life, something you'd like to get done. And you might just ask yourself, if you imagine yourself at the end of your life, let's say you're on your rocking chair, 98 years old, and looking back on this possible action, how does that feel? Does it feel wholesome? And as you contemplate this possible action, you might ask yourself as well, why would you want to do this? What is the why that informs this? And you might deepen your breath, and when you're ready, you can let your eyes open. I find the why question to be really helpful when I'm sort of questioning something I want to make happen. Every time I write a talk, on my little outline, I have some questions I ask myself. And the first question is, why is this important? And it really helps me to kind of like frame the talk and kind of bring my own sense of aliveness to it. And getting this distinction between making it happen and letting it happen can be really huge. When you can find that balance point in your life, it can really open up new possibilities. So in our culture, we celebrate people who make stuff happen out of sheer willpower. But if your intention isn't aligned with where you want to go, you may find that you can climb a ladder really fast, but the ladder might be on the wrong wall. And when you can align your intention with your actions, then it's really dynamic. So when you think of willpower of making your life happen, there's that question of like, well, what do I want to bring forth? But another question I find helpful is, well, what's calling you? What is it that's calling you forward? It's a different inquiry. And it really leads to this inquiry around letting go. I once had a dream. It was quite a few years ago. It was just one of those dreams that was so clear. I was on a battlefield. I was a soldier on a battlefield. And I was lying it felt so visceral. I was like lying in the mud, and I was bleeding, and I was dying. And the battle had moved over there. And so I was just sort of alone, kind of in the final moments of my life. And I remember thinking, how could this have happened to me? I was such a good soldier. And it was interesting how, at that time in my life, I was taking sort of a position of being a good soldier, like taking orders, doing a good job. And I realized sort of through reflecting on that dream that I wasn't being true to myself. I was acting out someone else's world and finding my part in what they wanted. But that was my wake-up call for myself. And I think for all of us, we know in mythology the 40 days and nights in the desert. What that represents is you taking the time you need to come in contact with your own sense of purpose, of what's calling you forward in your life. And that's where this practice of meditation can be so powerful. Because if you are making it happen, it's quite easily influenced by three particular forces. One of them is greed. If you are tinged with wanting, that will affect how you make your life happen. The opposite of that is aversion, of anger, judgment, blame. You're using willpower to avoid something. That's not skillful. And the third is delusion. If there's something you're believing that's not true, or something you aren't believing that is true, when that informs your actions, it may not be aligned with your truest intent. So taking the time to slow down and to deeply pause can be quite powerful. When you shift from doing to being, that just surrendering into the present moment, that's the realm where new possibilities can arise. That's the realm where intuition begins to arise. And so we're kind of going back and forth here. We're in action in the world, and then we slow down and we pause. But when we're caught in chronic doing, there's a great phrase the Quakers say, which is, don't just do something, sit there. There's something powerful on the pausing. And yet this is something that's really foreign to us because we're so trained to make it happen. We're so driven by those forces of desire and the forces of aversion, of judgment, blame, avoidance, fear, and by confusion, that it's so critical, the more you have going on, to pause. As a great Zen monk said, I meditate every day for 20 minutes, except for when I'm really busy, and then I meditate for 40. It's such a skillful thing. So what does it mean to pause? And that's where this practice comes in so powerfully. Because the mind is always reaching forward. It's just driven by anxiety. Using concentration to call it back, to relax and pause. Extraordinarily powerful. Taking time to be that non-judging witness, to notice the flow, where you're not reacting to every little thing in your life, but watching it Huge impact. And taking time to simply be present. There's so much research being done on the effect of these very, very simple practices, and it is truly extraordinary. Study after study after study shows its effect on your physiology, on your emotional well-being, on your clarity of mind, and particularly on your sense of intuition. Not only your capacity to have empathy for other people, but your capacity to not only navigate the linear rational mind so that you can compare and judge and figure stuff out really well, but when you're not comparing and not judging and not trying to figure stuff out, there's a clarity that comes in there as well. So there's a shadow side to making it happen. When you're caught in anxious doing, we fail to ask ourselves what we really, really want. Or we act out of fear, or we act out of greed, or we act out of confusion. And so many of us live lives that are not authentic. We just get lost in the trance. Well, there's a shadow side to surrender as well. If you just live a fully surrendered life, well, then you don't take responsibility for your life. Or you never fully engage. You never take risks. You're a spectator in the stands rather than being a player on the field. And so I think it's an experiment. As we each find our own way. Some of us are really good at doing. Some of us are really good at just being. And finding the balance between the two is really helpful. And I think so much of our practice in our life is engaging in activity and then evaluating what was the result of this activity. I remember many years ago, when I was in high school, I took a course in art and architecture, and I didn't realize I had to make a scale model of something. And so I made a scale model of my aunt's house up in Maine. I've got a cool little fishing cottage up in Maine, and I just hated the project. I just despised every little bit about it. But I did it, and then at Christmas I gave it to her. And when I gave it to her, I said, "You can throw this away tomorrow. It's totally fine, But here it is. I'm going to give it to you, and I just want you to know I hated making this." And I'll never forget her response. It was the coolest. She had this big smile on her face, and she said, "That is great. Now you know you don't want to be an architect." I thought, yeah, I don't want to be an architect. It was really helpful for me. So when you explore making your life happen and letting your life happen, it's a grand experiment. Ram Dass tells this great story of how he was hanging out with a friend of his, and they were doing some meditation. They may have done a little chemical research in there too. I'm not sure, but his friend said, "From now on, I'm just going to be. I'm just going to be." And Ram Dass was like, "Wow, cool." And then a little later, his friend got up to make a sandwich, and Ram Dass said, "Oh, hey, wait a minute! You said you were going to be." And he said, "Well, I'm being while I make my sandwich." And I think there's something about that. How do you be while you're engaged in your life? It's actually a very, very delicate state. In yoga, it's referred to as the Jivan Mukti. How do you be in your relationships, in your activity, and cultivate an unbroken connection to presence? It's an interesting inquiry. So then what does it mean to let it be? So I was flying back from New England, and I was working on this talk on my iPad. And the seat behind me was the classic nightmare plane scenario. It was a young mother with a 2-year-old boy and like a 6-month-old girl. And of course, the pressure change and the screaming, and she started reading a book to her son. I had my noise-canceling headphones jammed into my skull. I'm like, I got to get this talk done. And after a while, I thought, wait a minute, I'm writing a talk on letting your life happen. What if I just tried it? And so I took off my headphones, and I just sat back, and I just thought, I'm just going to surrender. So I got to hear a book read to me. And it was really cool for about 2 minutes. The mother was reading this book about Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and Robin, like having these adventures to her son. And so I'm listening to this, and I thought, is this what we're reading to kids these days? It was like they were on all these adventures, and every conflict was solved through violence. It was really harsh. It was like, so Batman kicked the bad man in the stomach and stopped the bank robbery. That's what you get for bullying other people, said Robin. And so I went on with my own narrative, like, when you tore that man's lungs out of his chest, you made me laugh, said Wonder Woman. You've got blood on your bat belt. It went on and on from there. When you look at this reflex of making and doing and will, and the possibility of letting be, I see how so many of us are primarily doers in our lives. We make things happen. In our culture, we're rewarded for that. And there's nothing wrong with doing and making your life happen. It can be incredibly skillful. But if it's done without mindfulness, if it's done without awareness, that willful effort may take you somewhere where your heart doesn't want you to go. And so we're always finding balance. For you to get here tonight took some effort. There was stuff you decided not to do. You had to arrange, be aware of the time, kind of bring yourself here fully. And then when you arrived, then you were able to kind of relax and explore what it's like just to let it be, to sit in meditation, observe what arises. And something I think, may come out of that. That reflex of doing can be dramatically informed by being. When you're in the creative process, if you write or paint or do anything that's creative, you know what that's like to open to the flow, to kind of open to the mystery. And this practice of meditation can be very much a part of that. There's that great saying you've probably heard that enlightenment is an accident, and meditation makes you accident prone. You use willpower to create the most optimal environment you can for creativity and intuition, the mystery to kind of arise out of that space. And so we have to find our way. And just letting it be is not the answer either, perhaps. Although we have these different meditative traditions that represent the two extremes, which I've shared before. You kind of have the extreme Zen on one side, meditate like your hair's on fire, die on the cushion. These are instructions. Bring yourself fully present, and you can really cultivate amazing things through concentration. And then you have these Tibetan teachings that say, enlightenment is only possible through deep relaxation and letting go. It's the search, it's the effort that's in the way. Just stop searching, let go, and what you're seeking is already here. It's closer than you can imagine. So how do we find balance between those two? And my sense of this is really, I think, so beautifully articulated in the Buddha's teachings of the middle way. Not too tight, not too loose. And when we can look through that lens, you become aware of when you're too bound up in doing. There's no joy, there's no freedom. You're kind of locked into that just pure willful, tight, gritting it out. The other end of that is being, the letting go. But if you just move into that space, it can feel ungrounded. It can feel like there's no keel to the sailboat. Wherever the wind goes, that's where you go. So it's about finding that middle way. That there are times in your life where you'll be guided toward doing. There'll be times in your life where you'll be guided to more of the letting go practice. So part of that letting go is letting go into what arises. Gil Franzl, one of my teachers, says how if you just sit for a little while, and sit for a little bit longer, at some point you're going to have to pee. That biological, wholesome urge will come. And then you can respond to that in a wholesome way. I don't think the church would want you to just sit through all of that. So in that same way, when you sit, there are other urges that will arise from that place. There are natural, wholesome intuitions that can arise. There are insights that arise through that stillness. So finding that balance. A friend of mine got very, very clear in his heart that he wanted to go to medical school. And he knew it would be hard. He knew it would be like the next 8 to 10 years of his life would be a grind. But that knowing came from that deep place inside. So that knowing informed his will, so his making it happen was aligned with a higher purpose. So to find that 40 days and nights where you can pause and move into that place of letting it be, so that you can be informed when you move into action, your action will most probably be from a more skillful and wholesome place. It's at least the possibility. So the antidote to that unlived life is coming into that place of deep, non-judging awareness and opening to the mystery of this incredible life that we're given. I'd like to close with a short reading. Actually, it's kind of a long reading, so you might want to settle in and close your eyes. When you think of who you are as a doer, of your life purpose in the world, when you ask yourself why you are doing what you're doing, and looking through that lens of your life fully lived, I'd like to read a little poem from Nadine Stair, 87 years old, from Louisville, Kentucky. If I had my life to live over, I'd try to make more mistakes next time. I would relax. I would limber up. I would be sillier than I have been on this trip. I know of very few things I would take seriously. I would be crazier. I would be less hygienic. I'd take more chances and I'd take more trips. I'd climb more mountains. I'd swim more rivers. I'd watch more sunsets. I would eat more ice cream and less beans. I would have more actual troubles and fewer imaginary ones. You see, I'm one of those people who lives prophylactically and sensibly and sanely, hour after hour, day after day. I've had my moments, and if I had to do it over, I'd have more of them. In fact, I try to have nothing else, just moments, one after the other, instead of living so many years ahead of each day. I have been one of those people who never goes anywhere without a thermometer, a hot water bottle, a gargle, a raincoat, and a parachute. If I had to do it over, I'd go places and do things and travel lighter than I have. If I had my life to live over, I would start barefooted earlier in the spring and stay that way till late in the fall. I'd play hooky more. I wouldn't make such good grades except by accident. I'd ride more merry-go-rounds. I'd pick more daisies. In these final moments, you might just reflect on this balance in your life of who you are as the one who makes your life happen, and the possibility of letting yourself be more informed by pausing, letting your life happen and sensing what it is that's calling you forward. So when you're ready, you can deepen your breath. And when you're ready, you can let your eyes open. Thank you for bearing with my rant on making it happen and letting it happen. Few announcements before we end. Just a reminder that there's awesome yoga that starts at 6:30. Also, there's a great book club. New information about the next meeting will be coming up. There's also a very